You're listening to Confessions of a Bookkeeper, where we look at businesses through the eyes of their books. My name is Mark, your Chief Bookkeeping Officer, and I spent years cleaning up and reviewing some, let's say, interesting books. Sometimes a new client doesn't come to us because they never had bookkeeping, but instead, they come to us because someone else stepped aside. And you can always tell something is up. There's a different kind of handoff when another bookkeeping company decides to transition away from a client. It's not always neat or polished. Sometimes it's quick. Maybe the bookkeeper's even a little bit relieved. You can hear it in their voice. Naturally that raises questions. Why now? Why us? And what happened before this? But those questions don't ultimately matter. The truth is transitions happen all the time in this industry, and not necessarily because something went wrong, but because businesses evolve, clients grow, and their needs change. When we take on a client from another firm, we don't dwell on the past or assume the worst. We treat it like it is, a fresh start. That means no blame, no speculation, and no postmortem about who did what. We focus on what's in front of us, understanding their business, resetting their expectations, and establishing the kind of trust that makes everyone comfortable moving forward. Because our goal isn't just to keep the books clean, it's to make the transition feel effortless for the client, their staff, and even their CPA involved. We understand the company can just be, overwhelmed with this whole process. The last thing we need is more friction, especially coming from us. That's how we met the Midnight Surgeon. This surgeon was very successful and very established in the community. He operated multiple surgical centers, each with several operating rooms and full-time staff. He also owned the properties his practices ran from and maintained a range of other investments in real estate holdings. So when you think about his financial picture, you can safely assume this was a large, intricate financial operation, the kind that feeds into a very complex K1 personal return. We handled the bookkeeping for his surgical centers only, keeping his operations very streamlined so that his CPA could focus on the higher level tax strategy and planning. When we came in, his books weren't a mess. They were just kind of worn down by the company's growth. Like a lot of tax-related balances weren't maintained, for instance. They passed through multiple hands, you can kind of tell, and everyone had done their best they could. But the structure hadn't kept pace with the scale of the businesses. That's the quiet truth about growth. It doesn't break things right away. It erodes them slowly. The systems that worked last year, they start to creak under the new weight, and no one notices until something starts to slip. And usually those are those new accounts I mentioned, or maybe missing new accounts altogether, or perhaps liabilities never being updated. Look, we love to see our clients grow. Growth means success. It means more jobs are created, more opportunity, and usually more complexity, which is where we came in. What we learned over the years is that growth itself isn't the problem. The structure around it is. If the engagement isn't built to grow alongside with a client, it eventually will crack under its own weight. That's why we emphasize transparency from the start. If transaction volume increases, if new entities open, if the scope changes, we simply can talk about it. We review the engagement, adjust what's needed, and make sure the level of service continues to match the client's success. We don't want to surprise anyone, and we don't want surprises either. It's not about penalizing growth, it's about supporting it. Our goal is to make life easier for the ambitious clients that we have, not harder. When we plan for scalability, when pricing expectations are clear, clients don't feel blindsided later. They feel understood. Because the truth is, clients don't mind paying for value. They just need to know what they're getting and have it spelled out up front. And when you keep the communication lines clear and the structure fair, those conversations about renewal or fee adjustment, they just become more simple. It's not about negotiation. We're just trying to align. In our world, alignment is everything. If we can explain what's changing, why it's changing, and how it benefits that client, they usually don't blink. The work proves the price before you ever have to say it. When we first start with a new client like this, the discovery phase, it's key. We don't just want to request access and dive into the books. We want to spend the first few weeks learning how they operate, having many conversations, things like how are your payments to your vendors authorized? Where does the revenue typically flow from? Who are the people in your organization I should be speaking to on a regular basis? We'll map out those internal processes, talk about their ideal future state, and quietly observe how information moves between those key people, because in high volume operations, what's broken is rarely the math, it's the communication. That discovery process also builds trust. The clients start to see we're not just data entry people, we're translators taking all of that, and I don't want to use the word chaos, but it could work, and turning that into clarity for them. And when they see that, they start to relax. They start to hand over a little bit more responsibility, and that's when you really start doing your best work, when it can become autonomous for them. What made this engagement unique wasn't the complexity alone, though. It was the pace. Surgeons that we work with, they don't do 9 to 5s, and they don't communicate 9 to 5 either. Their world runs on precision and urgency, and our job is to fit within that mold. So when an email comes in at midnight, hence the name of the episode title, it's not a burden for us. It's a sign that they trust you enough to reach out whenever they can and when it matters the most. That level of trust doesn't come from automation or ticketing systems. It comes from, being human, from actually answering, from being present, from understanding that success doesn't stop when the office lights go out. And you might say to me, well, as bookkeepers, don't you want, very typical hours? But for me as a business owner, I can set my own hours, but also I can work the engagement to anticipate, these types of situations. We learned early on that for some clients, being available is really part of that service, not because they expect you to be on call 24/7 all day, but because they need to know you'll respond when it counts. There's a big difference between always working and always being dependable. And we focus on the latter. That's where we win. That's where we win engagements, not through flashy things, but through consistency. And in many high net worth relationships that we have, like this one, the engagement extends beyond the business. You're not just talking about supporting your doctor client, but it's really usually their whole family. Their spouse might be managing part of the operations or a second location, and their kids might be on payroll as well. We see it all the time, learning, their father's business from the ground up. In those cases, the financial structure becomes a family structure and it becomes quite personal. Emails come from different people about different entities, and you kind of need to know how to handle each interaction with the same professionalism and clarity that you give to your doctor client. Sometimes that means offering one-off advisory or consultation. Sometimes it's just being available to answer a quick call or helping them understand how one of their entities affects one of the others. Because when a family trusts you with their finances, it's more than just a business to business client relationship. This is like stewardship at the household level. And that brings us to the real currency in those relationships. Once again, it's always communication. Every touch point matters. Every follow-up, every proactive check-in, every coordination with their CPA or accountant, it all builds credibility. You can be technically perfect and still lose a client. I think we've all seen that before, if they don't feel personally connected to you. The opposite is also true, where too much communication can make it look like a person is erratic. And so there is always going to be a little bit of a balance to that. When communication is consistent, though, and clear, clients don't need convincing when the engagement needs to renew. And they already felt that value, I'm sure. Most of these types of clients, they don't really remember the dollar amount they paid last year. They remember how they feel and how supported they felt. And that's what keeps long-term relationships strong. It's not just about performance, it's your presence. And here's something else that matters. The better that you communicate, the more you learn about your client's world. That's where the collaboration really starts to matter. The context. When you work with high growth, high liability professionals, you start to see how their personal, professional, and financial lives overlap. You get a window into what drives them, what stresses them out, and what they need from you to make their life easier. The Midnight Surgeon story wasn't just about complex, high volume accounting. It was about understanding how his success shaped his time, his family, and his expectations. Taking over a client from another bookkeeping firm, it's not a red flag. It's an opportunity to challenge yourself to build stronger structures and clear communications with the new client. It also is a reminder to other business owners, if your service relies on long-term clients, you need to structure your engagements with the future in mind. It needs to be future-proofed. Don't price to survive month to month. Price to sustain a relationship. Make it clear and make it fair to yourselves, and make it scalable for the client. We see this with law firms, dental practices, software developers, anyone who builds something that eventually outgrows the way it started. You have to make sure your systems, your communication, your pricing model evolve as fast as your clients do. Otherwise, you're not really building a business, you're just kind of maintaining it. And the Midnight Surgeon reminded us that availability is important, but structure and clarity are what makes that availability sustainable financially for your bookkeeping and business. Because if you do this right, if you serve your clients so well that they feel the weight of your support every step of the way, then when they eventually outgrow you, they'll walk away saying, that was a lot in the best way possible. And honestly, that's exactly what we want. At the end of the day, we're not just about keeping books, we're about helping high performing people find balance between their work and the numbers that keep it alive. And if we can do that, if we can give them just a little bit more peace of mind, then those midnight emails and the long calls, the constant motion, all of it is worth it. Thanks so much for listening to Confessions of a Bookkeeper.